Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to another Advice for the Current Times webinar with myself and, of course, our brilliant guest speaker, fellow partner in crime, the brilliant Guy Dudley. We always like these to be a discussion. As you know, we've done many of these together, and it's always wonderful to have your thoughts, your views, your comments, your questions. So please feel free to use the chat button throughout this. And, you know, I'll always love to feed your comments and questions to Guy, or use the question and answer button if you like. If you're going to make it official, up to you. I'll keep an eye on both. And obviously, you can share any of your thoughts and observations on social media, as we often do, using the hashtag #TheWholeTeacher. I'm Andrew Hammond. I'm a head teacher, and I'm also education advisor and pathway lead editor for Discover Education. So it's great to have your company. If you haven't been on this before, then we'll be speaking for about half an hour, maybe 40 minutes or something. We'll take some questions as well throughout, maybe some questions at the end. And we try and hit all the clues in the title, really. We try and hit all the different issues and things that we feel are on head teachers' minds, school leaders' minds at the moment in the current times. So there's a couple of partners in crime. And so the agenda today, well, before let's get into the agenda, let's welcome our brilliant friend and partner, Guy Dudley, head of advice at the NAHT for many years, always on the back phone to school leaders like myself, and as Guy would say, helping us to stay in control and maybe to stay sane. And I'm going to say those beautiful words. You're on mute, which you'll get me for afterwards. I know you're going to get me for that.
I noticed as soon as I'd said the word.
I got in quick because you would do it for me. I know you would. So. Guy, it's great to see you again. Always a smile. Do you want to maybe talk us through the agenda, because it's a really interesting one today?
Yeah, I hope so, and I hope the listeners and viewers will think so too. We haven't done this before, which is actually do a case study, an actual case study in one of these webinars, Andy, have we?
No, I don't think we have actually, like this one. No.
And I think it was about time I thought we did. So we're going to do one. And it's all about, in brief, staff conduct. But a lot of listeners, viewers will have heard this expression, breach of trust and confidence. Yeah. And some of them may be a little uncertain about what it means. But I can categorically say that it's one of the most common reasons why people are dismissed in the education sector, teaching and non-teaching staff. So I actually wanted to walk you through a real case study involving a primary school that went all the way to a tribunal and an appeal tribunal. We can then talk about the lessons learnt from that case study, which are fairly simple and straightforward.
Yep.
And then I think you and I are going to discuss how we can stop getting there in the first place. So we'll talk about the hearts and minds strategies of school leaders.
Absolutely.
About creating the right culture and values that hopefully can, and some practical steps and some of the goodwill that exchanged at the time to stop us getting into this position in the first place.
Absolutely. That sounds terrific. It sounds like a good mix of things today. So just before you start, Guy, just briefly, just to remind everybody, of course, if they're not aware, that even the word pathway, I think most people will be aware of, but just in case you're not. So the Discovery Education that I work for, of course, and advise, I should say, are in full partnership with NAHT when it comes to this brilliant pathway program. It's an online platform, as Guy knows, online platform of multiple different CPD courses. From well-being and critical reflection and motivation and so forth, to resilience, to developing successful teams, to a whole range of other different leadership skills and teaching skills. But the focus is very much the whole person. And that's really been the theme for all of our webinars, really. It's not just about your professional practice. It's not just what you know, is it? It's what you can do with what you know. And that's inextricably linked to how you feel. And now I'm back in headship again. I certainly know that. So Guy certainly helps us with that. So that's just a little intro as to why we're here. And if you're wanting to find out more about Pathway at any time during this webinar, my colleague Bobby will always be putting the bits of information. She's already done it. Look at that. Amazing, like clockwork, on the chat stream if you want to click on that at some stage and find out more. Right. Enough of that. Let's get straight on. Guy, do you want to talk us through this fascinating case?
Yeah, and bear with me, folks, because it won't be long. And I just a couple of caveats. One, everyone on this call who's registered for this call will get a copy of this, and no reason to take notes. It'll all be in the document that you get sent. And secondly, if you've got any questions, please pop them in the chat box.
Yeah.
And Andrew and I can sort of deal with them.
Always. Yeah.
And if I can't, Andrew will, and vice versa.
Yeah.
So this was a case of conduct that breached trust and confidence. It was an actual case involving a school leader at a primary school. Clearly, and I'm sure you'll understand, the case, I've anonymized the case, but not the detail or the principle. So I'm going to walk you through it so you can understand why it ended up in an employment tribunal and why it perhaps went to an employment appeal tribunal. So the background to this case. So in this case, two deputy heads were friends at neighbouring schools. And one of the deputies, I'm going to call them Andy. I've given them both androgynous names. Andy was arrested for possessing indecent images. Sam, Andy's friend and the other deputy, was advised by their head teacher that they should not stay in touch with Andy. However, Sam said they wouldn't do that, and Sam's head teacher took no further action on this occasion. And by all means, put yourself in the shoes of Sam's head teacher if you want. Some months later, following comments that had come to the attention of Sam's head teacher, Sam was invited to a meeting to discuss their continuing friendship with Andy. And the school was satisfied with Sam's responses to their questions. And they took no steps to alert Sam to the comments that had come to their attention and didn't warn Sam of the consequences of their continuing relationship. Slightly odd that the school didn't, in my opinion, but they didn't. A short while later, after this meeting, and I'm talking days and weeks after this meeting, Sam was suspended from work, and a disciplinary meeting was convened to hear three allegations. One, that the continuing friendship with Andy was seriously impacting on the school's reputation. Two, that the continuing friendship presented a potential and an avoidable risk, safeguarding risk, to the pupils of the school. And three, that Sam's judgment in this matter had led to a breakdown of trust and confidence of the head teacher and rendered Sam's continued employment at the school untenable. Sam was dismissed following the disciplinary hearing and subsequently appealed the decision. So we're still within the school environment now. The appeal panel, school's appeal panel, found that the first two allegations were not proven. So there was no serious impact on the school's reputation and that there wasn't a potential for a safeguarding risk. But they did find that there had been a breakdown of trust and confidence and upheld the decision to dismiss Sam. Dissatisfied with the appeal panel's decision, Sam took the case to an employment tribunal. So this is a fair course of action for anyone to take if they feel that they've exhausted the school's procedures to resolve their particular areas of concern. So the case went to an employment tribunal, and the tribunal, on the facts of the case, accepted that the reason for dismissal was some other substantial reason, which is a common catch-all concept for those dismissals that don't fall into the other categories. The tribunal then went on to decide if the overall process was fair. So they had decided that the reason for Sam's dismissal was fair. They went on to decide whether the process was fair by considering the events leading up to the dismissal. the tribunal felt that it was unfair that the school did not formally warn Sam of the potential consequences of their continuing friendship with Andy. The tribunal also felt that the school had failed at an early stage to deal with the issues arising from Sam's continued friendship with Andy. So even when the school became aware of the comments relating to this case, if you remember, it didn't take any steps to inform Sam of their concerns or advise Sam about their conduct in this matter. The school had failed to set out a clear instruction to Sam of the consequences of breaching the instruction. For these reasons, the tribunal found the dismissal to be unfair. So you can see there that the school's inaction of not warning Sam, of not informing them of their concerns, not issuing them with an instruction, led to the dismissal. So the school appealed the decision of the tribunal to find that the dismissal was unfair. And on appeal, so this then went to the Employment Appeal Tribunal. So on appeal, it was held that by the school that this was a case for dismissal for some other substantial reason. In this case, a loss of trust and confidence. And the Appeal Tribunal found that the Employment Tribunal was not entitled to have regard to the causes of that loss of confidence, and that it should have restricted itself to the loss of trust and confidence alone, not what led up to it. In other words, the argument on the school's behalf was that the focus for the Employment Tribunal decision had to be upon the reason for dismissal, and it is the reason for the dismissal that the fairness is judged. The school then argued that the dismissal, it then argued to the Employment Tribunal, Appeal Tribunal, that had the dismissal been for misconduct instead of loss of trust and confidence, the presence or absence of a warning would have been a highly material factor in assessing the overall fairness. However, in this case, the dismissal was for some other substantial reason. So on one hand, the Employment Appeal Tribunal was saying, well, this was a case of misconduct, and therefore you should have issued her with a warning. The school was saying, no, it wasn't. It was some other substantial reason dismissal. And the Employment Appeal Tribunal rejected that argument and said that the Employment Tribunal was entitled to take a broader view. Now, a couple of last points before we go on to what we can learn from this. And I hope you're all still with me.
Yep.
The thinking of the Appeal Tribunal is that where the substantial reason for dismissal relied upon a consequence of conduct, as it was in this case, there was a clear analogy to a dismissal for conduct. And it was appropriate for the Employment Tribunal to have regard to the events leading up to the breakdown of trust and confidence and the dismissal. In short, this case had all the hallmarks of a case of misconduct. I'll summarize them in plain English. The final point on this was the Appeal Tribunal stated that you simply can't reach a conclusion that there has been a loss of confidence without examining all the circumstances and merits of the case. So in short, and this is my interpretation, Andrew, of this particular case, this was a case of misconduct. Someone was conducting themselves in such a way that the school should have recognized that and issued a warning. And if that warning had been breached, as it was in this particular occasion, they would then have good grounds for dismissal for the reason of misconduct. This was a case where misconduct led to a loss of trust and confidence. And the school decided to dismiss on the consequences rather than the cause. So I think the lessons learned from this was that in the first instance, ensure that if the matters in dispute relate to alleged breach of trust and confidence, a school would be best to use an external party to conduct an investigation. So whenever there's an allegation of a breach of trust and confidence, it's always better for the school to bring someone from outside in to conduct that investigation. The reason for doing that is that they can then decide, and investigators generally are trained to do this, whether or not, what grounds you're dismissing on. On this particular occasion, it should have been conduct, which was the cause of the school's concerns. The consequences led to a breach of trust and confidence from the head teacher. Well, those were the consequences of the misconduct. But it's better that the school don't sit in judgment on that. They let a third independent party make that judgment. If there's an issue regarding an employee's conduct, which then escalates to a breach of trust and confidence, as it did in this case, then as the employer, you must make the employee aware of their conduct and the consequences that may arise. In this particular case, and I noticed a question there, and we'll come back to it. Yep. In this particular case, you effectively have got the school sitting in judgment about what constitutes misconduct, and a breach of trust and confidence. It's much better where there are these grey areas. Is it the conduct, or is it conduct that relates or escalates to a breach of trust and confidence? And the tribunal said it was wrong to dismiss on the grounds of the breach of trust and confidence because that was a consequence of the misconduct. And because the school didn't spot it as misconduct, they didn't treat it as such, and they didn't issue her a warning. And with any dismissal, there normally has to be, as there would be in performance management capability, sickness absence, there would be a series of warnings before you dismissed. Final point I'd make, and then we'll come back and answer those questions. Where appropriate, an employee with a warning that conduct may amount or escalate to a breach of trust and confidence, set out the instruction to the employee not to continue with such behaviour, and make them aware that if they continue with such behaviour, their contract may ultimately be terminated. This was a really grey area, which is why it became a case, which is why it went to the tribunal, which is why it went to the appeal tribunal. And like lots of tribunals, the case law coming out of it is that be very clear what the grounds of your dismissal are. And if they're conduct, they should have warnings attached to it. Yep. If they're performance management, they should have warnings attached to it. Sickness absence warnings, redundancy. In this case, the school should have recognised that, but they went straight for the jugular and dismissed for some other substantial reason, which was it suited them at the time, or perhaps they weren't well advised to actually say, actually, this is a case of misconduct. Yeah, sure, it may escalate to a trust of breach and confidence, and most cases of misconduct will eventually do that anyway, if you allow it to continue. But by putting in the series of warnings, you'd hope that that conduct would cease, would stop, improve.
That's the reason for the warnings. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. Gosh,
we've got some questions there, haven't we?
Shall we? Thank you, guys. So, interesting one from Alison. Would another head teacher be a viable external person? You talked about the importance of having that external person as the first lesson. Yeah. Another head teacher from outside the group, presumably?
Yeah, absolutely. I think as long as they weren't had any association, I mean, they could be within the NAHT or a federation.
Okay.
But I think as long as they didn't have any working association with that school, i.e. they came to teach there or they came to do school improvement activity there, I think as long as they didn't do that, because if the allegations are anything to do with the school's reputation, that teacher has a vested interest in protecting that school's reputation. So I think as long as they can be independently appointed,
Yep.
And take advice from their relevant HR teams, another head teacher could be that person.
Could be that person. And then from Andrew, would HR, presumably, I'm assuming you mean HR within the MAT or the group that you perhaps work for, perhaps, would HR not be the investigator?
They can be. Often in cases where it's very straightforward, they are the investigator, and quite rightly so. It's often, there's been lots of cases in HR recently where cases have failed. This has been quite widely publicised by the CIPD, the governing body for HR, that the advisors, HR are there to advise management. And actually to make them part of the process isn't terribly wise in cases that are perhaps grayer than some of the more black and white ones. So again, the answer could be yes, but where there is a grey matter and where HR are very much seen as the advisors to what could be a complex case, it's still better not to have HR in those particular cases. More straightforward cases, no problem. Absolutely.
Yeah. And it was a similar question from Louise as well. Thank you, Louise. Same question, actually. Yes. So one from Samantha, actually, maybe just before we move on, Guy, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Samantha. What other types of misconduct could be argued to lead to a breakdown of trust and confidence?
I think anything, thank you, Samantha. I mean, anything that really could bring potentially the cause, the reputation of the school, or put the reputation of the school at risk.
Right.
So, for example, I dealt with a case many years ago of a head teacher in Wales who was filmed during the World Cup of behaving very poorly in the local pub. That was filmed, made its way onto social media.
Yeah.
He was identifiable as the head teacher, and his behaviour was described as less than gentlemanly. I'm putting it mildly. And he brought the school into disrepute.
Yeah.
Now he was a member of the NHT, and we rescued him. And sort of knocked him back picked him up and dusted him down, and off he went. But it ended up in him having a warning, which was the right thing to do. Yeah. Because it was misconduct. Had that behaviour not been checked, and of course the World Cup would have, well, perhaps not for Wales, but would have led on. Apologies to anyone else. But would have led on to a series of matches, and it would have done in the knockout stages.
So that warning.
The chances are that behaviour would have been repeated again. So I think anything that can bring the school into disrepute, or the very common one is safeguarding, where perhaps a head teacher is taking a very healthy interest in the development of somebody, a pupil, and that is often seen as overzealous and may be regarded as potential, especially if it's taking place in a closed area, may be deemed to be inappropriate behaviour, and of course that gets reported back. So I think, and anyone who's taking photographs of children without their consent, so anything safeguard related or behaviour outside the school, which is often one that people think, well, it's nothing to do with my school, what I get up to in my spare time. Well, actually it is. It's precisely to do. You're there to uphold certain standards, and those standards apply in and outside school, especially if you're wearing something where the school is identifiable, like a cagoule on an outside activity, and pupils similarly if they're wearing the school uniform. Does that give you a couple of good examples of where that could happen?
And just out of interest, Guy, I don't know why I want to know. I'm just curious, really, that in this particular specific case that you mentioned for Andy and Sam, just in terms of time frame, how long did it how much time elapsed from the moment when perhaps the suspension, Sam was suspended, to the end of the appeal tribunal?
Approximately 9 months.
Oh, right.
So it can take up an awful amount of
Can't
time.
it just? Yeah.
And all that was wrong in this case, just to sort of reflect back on it just temporarily, Sam was not conducting herself in a good way, associating with this other person. The school should have recognized that and provided a warning.
Yeah.
And therefore, had she breached that warning, it would have led to a dismissal fairly. The trouble is, Sam's conduct wasn't checked by the school. They just kept on believing her out of goodwill, out of perhaps she may have had a very good reputation up to that point. And then, of course, it reached a point where it had gone beyond that, and it started to bring the school into a sort of poor position. And that's when it was too late and they had to dismiss her. But of course, they'd chosen what it ended up with was a dismissal that wasn't safe because it wasn't for the right reason.
Gosh,
that's where even HR people can fall short. They don't recognise that actually, if you recognise poor behaviour, conduct, the school has a responsibility to check that and to correct it, even though that sounds quite harsh. But ultimately, they will be in a much better place. And if that person does continue to breach that warning, you have a fair, defensible reason to dismiss them.
You do. Yeah. Okay. Gosh, that was really comprehensive, Guy. Absolutely fascinating. It really was, and I'm sure everybody on the call will have found that fascinating and a salutary lesson for everybody. So, do you want to move on to hearts and minds? Shall we? Shall we look at something positive?
Let's be positive. Well, it strikes me that people are dismissed from the education sector in the same way that they're dismissed from the medical sector, the industrial sector, the hospitality and the voluntary sector. I mean, people are dismissed. It's part of organizational life. And I think one of the ways in which school leaders, and I use that term loosely, can help create the right environment for the right conduct is to go straight back to the drawing board and say, well, what sort of culture do we want at this school?
Absolutely.
What sort of values do we want for this school?
Yeah.
And I've probably looked at thousands of school websites over the years.
Yeah, I bet. And
looked at their little bit on values and ethos. And, I don't think anyone would disagree with any of them. They all say and do the right things, and they're all said and done in the right way. But often, some of the schools where I've had the most involvement is where they've had those values and cultures up front and center on the website, but then they forget to back it up with any backbone in the school and in the school architecture. And one of the most valuable ways that I've seen schools create the right culture is it's mother and apple pie in some respects, Andrew, but it's actually involving the people in the school. And one of the best ways you can do that is by doing a staff survey, for example, asking the staff of if you're a new head teacher, even if you're not, the value of a school survey can be incredibly powerful. And of course, what you can do is you can use that data that you collect to help shape, not necessarily to determine the final version, but to help shape the type of ethos and values and principles that you want at that school. What attracted people to that school in the first place? What attracted you to the school that you're working at? And I'm sure a lot of that was its values.
Very much so.
It's sort of great. So you just think it's sometimes the only thing that really attracts people.
So shall we, because we've got a template, haven't we? We've got a sample. Is now a good time to share it on the Pathway program?
Absolutely.
Great.
So
Let's have a look at that. Yeah.
what we've got for people on the advice hub, which is some have described it as a jewel in the crown. I would just describe it as the advice hub.
You're far too modest. Far too modest to say so. This is edited by you with some amazing pieces on there. I mean, very quickly, it's these 12 categories. And if you look at any of these different categories, you'll go into, and of course, this covers all the sort of things in our inbox, doesn't it? From a leading and teaching point of view. If you go into any of those categories, let's choose HR as a quick example. You have an absolute treasure trove of 2, 3, 4, 5-page articles written by Guy and his team to really keep us on the straight and narrow, frankly. And inevitably, HR is quite a big section, but anybody in school leadership knows why. But we're looking at working with others, aren't we, now?
Yes, this is so working with others is a part of the Pathway Hub that does what it says on the tin. It sort of looks at working with parents, pupils, staff, people from particular communities. I think we've got the Gypsy, Roma and Traveller community in there as well. So, you know, it's recognising that head teacher, in your role as head teacher, you're dealing with a whole bunch of different people. And what we've got there, and your cursor was just over it there, is a model staff survey. So there's a little bit of preamble for you because it shouldn't be treated lightly. But I think they are, where I've seen them play a part, is they're incredibly powerful. And we've actually done I've actually sort of pulled together a model staff survey, so you can actually print that off.
This is great.
Print it.
Yeah.
It's not too long. It's I think half a dozen questions. There's a freestyle, a few freestyle sections there as well. It's probably 20 minutes, 30 at the most. Could be a good idea for an inset day.
Yeah, brilliant. I'm going to use one of these. I did one when I first arrived, actually, but I'm going to do one again towards the end of this term, and I'm going to use this this template, I think.
And I think, well, it's a tried and tested template. It's a fairly robust, but it's not particularly controversial either. No. But it does get to the bottom of what I hope most people will be trying to get to.
Sure. Brilliant. So, thank you for that, Guy. And we'll nip back in again, actually, because there's a few other documents that we're going to share, aren't there?
Yeah.
Today. But no questions at the moment. I think you're able to crack on.
Okay. Well, I mean, I guess the point I wanted to make here, Andrew, was use school data to set the vision and values. And there's plenty of it. I mean, schools are full of data. One thing we know they are full of data. And it's better not to create the wheel. I think it's also really important for when you want to set a framework, a culture, an atmosphere, to set very clear expectations. And so I'm talking about not only expectations within the school, but expectations within the classroom, so that those expectations are aligned to the culture. Culture isn't something you should only see in the corridors when you're all passing each other. Culture is something you see in the classroom, in the corridors, on the playing field, at the school gates. It's everywhere. It's all pervasive.
How we do things, isn't it? How we do things around here.
It is. And I think, you know, the positive reinforcement of that helps to encourage the continuous behaviour and also engaging parents, as I know all school teachers, school leaders do. But again, it enforces it and reinforces it outside of the school hours as well. And I think as long as they're reasonable expectations, I think they're reasonable to then follow. I think also, and I think all head teachers will recognise this, you need to establish consequences for negative behaviour. You reward and reinforce good behaviour. And the same goes for staff as well. You know, if staff do continue to conduct themselves in a way that isn't wholly appropriate, you know, they need to understand that there will be consequences too. And of course, that's not a threat. That's just part of a process. And, you know, I said to a head teacher the other day, we're all in a process. And he said, well, I'm not. I said, you're in the performance management process. He said, oh yes, I am, of which there are consequences.
I think you certainly find not that those negative, not that those consequences for negative behaviour are in any way published and they're not available publicly, but inevitably sometimes the person on the receiving end will tell others. And I have to say, it doesn't do any harm from the other colleague's point of view, both in order to retain their respect for dealing with something, and also as a shot across others' bows that if other people pursue the same sort of negative behaviour, the same consequences happen, isn't it?
Yeah.
You have to.
I think the word that comes across time and time again when you're building a school culture,
yeah,
and trying to build that energy, that positive energy, is safe.
right.
People
Right.
like to feel safe.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and by that I don't mean physically safe, although it does encompass that.
Yeah.
It means that, you know, there are some rules, there are some boundaries. I feel safe working within those. And actually, if I see someone breaking them, they will be dealt with. You know, it's part of that civil society, isn't it? It's part of being part of a civil, and a school is a microcosm of that. And I think pupils, teachers, school leaders like to feel safe in their environment. And they do that generally when they've had a part to play, they've contributed, they've participated. And therefore I would also include support staff in that. This isn't just about teaching and teaching staff. There's no, just because you're one or the other doesn't mean to say that you're immune from culture or all the things that go with it. And I think the other two important groups to get involved are parents.
Yeah.
And that's not just about keeping good communications open, but it's actually connecting the school experience to the family. Yeah. So that they can reiterate those good practices that you encourage at school. And I'm sure you see that at your school, Andrew. You know, it's very, and I'm sure all the listeners and viewers do that as well, and includes their voice and decision making, and connects the pupils to the school culture too, with things like pupil voice.
It's lovely to be able to use those instruments like pupil voice, like parent meetings and so forth, to really articulate and shout about the impact of the values. Absolutely. And that's something that we're doing here a lot. So we're conducting, and I did it since I arrived actually, because it just happens to be something I'm so fascinated about, school culture, is the efficacy of that culture, and, you know, lifting the words from the page and living them. But what is the impact also, actually? Because you can't necessarily sort and rank it. You wouldn't wish to do that or measure it. But it is there, and there are levers that you can push and pull. There are assets of your cultural assets, but then there is that impact study to be done. You know, bottle of wine for somebody who can write me a one-page impact study on one of the values. You know, where they were and where they are. You know. Yeah. But there's nothing parents like more than to see that it's more than the English and the maths.
Absolutely,
isn't it? As we all know,
it's all the glue that sticks all of that together.
Yeah, and it's the glue.
People often call culture glue, don't they? And I think
they do.
I think when children feel engaged, they build relationships that affirm that safety and welcome them, that welcomes them into a space where they feel able to learn without judgment. So I think that feeling of safety is hugely important. But we're largely talking about staff today, so I think it's important that staff feel safe in conducting their duties, and that they know that there's consequences if they don't. And you know, there's and I'm not talking about them, but actually for other people who don't behave in ways that are aligned to the expectations and values of the school.
Is now a good time to talk about that essential ingredient of goodwill? Is that where we are now? We're nearly there.
Absolutely, and I think,
because I do think that's an important element.
It is, and I think this very much boils down, doesn't it, to the individual working relationships that managers have with their staff. And it's always good to take the temperature with managers. So I'm talking about subject leads, year leads, those people who are sort of, very much of the backbone of the school, and make it function effectively and efficiently. So much of that relies on their goodwill,
doesn't it?
To go the extra mile, their goodwill to find the time,
doesn't it, just
to spend with a member of staff who's struggling.
And I think that there's nothing to erode goodwill. I think the arch enemy, actually, of goodwill, in my experience anyway, is resentment. And resentment is the unwanted gift that I think will be given to you by the cynic. And cynicism, well, we know what cynicism does in schools, but I do think it's the cynic in the staff room who may say to somebody who is awash with goodwill, you do realise, Charlie, or you do realise, Jane, that no one else does 2 after-school clubs, but you do. Why do you do 2? No one else does. In fact, Brian over there and Billy over there and Jenny over there doesn't do any. And you just start to chip away at that goodwill, and you start to think, am I awash with goodwill, or am I a mug? And that little drop of resentment is, in my experience, is the thing that starts to erode the goodwill, and we need goodwill.
And how much do we value it in our private lives when someone does us a favour or someone goes the extra mile to help us out? And yet some people are quite happy to leave it at the school gate and not bring it in with them. Or some people, as you say, bring it in and then get often taken advantage of.
It's that cynic, isn't it, that perhaps doesn't wish to see so much goodwill because they're worried the goodwill will flush them out, will show them up. But I'm certainly the leader that, and this isn't the case here, by the way. We're completely free of cynicism here, entirely, which is terrific. But if there are cynics in anywhere, I give them a lot of love. Got a lot of love to give a cynic.
Well, there's there's less energy used in being positive than there is in being negative. Generally,
it's true. It takes fewer muscles to smile.
And I think whilst I can talk about putting the strategy and the staff conduct, and we've got lots of that in the Advice Hub.
You have.
Ultimately, it's about how people feel.
It is.
Around walking around the place. Do I feel valued?
I couldn't agree more.
Do I feel that I have a part to play in this school? And we've got lots of little bits and pieces on the Advice Hub where we've it's all very well. We've got lots of pieces, and anyone will find this on any Advice Hub where, what do you do when things go wrong? Well, you've got the disciplinary code, you've got the staff conduct code, but there are some parts of this, and we'll touch on one in a moment. I'm just trying to see if I can find it down, a staff code of conduct, where actually, if you engage staff, and this goes back to the case study, Andrew, I think. It might be called a model staff code of conduct, but I think if you can engage staff very early on and work with them and it's a great inset day topic, by the way, work with them to make sure that that you've got the staff code of conduct, there it is, exactly how you want it. We've got a model there for you as well, so you can literally print this off. That's where you tie them down. That's where you tie the goodwill down. That's why you tie the behaviors, the expectations. And, therefore the Sam and the Andy case wouldn't have got as far as it did if the school had, and if you just pause there, Andrew, you can sort of see, treating pupils with respect, being kind to one another. Kindness is such a wonderful thing. Yes, if we just pause there, it's about the language you use. It's about how people are treated with dignity and respect, tolerance, the British values. Yes, and if all of that fails, there are the statutory frameworks that will catch them and deal with them. But you never really want to get there.
Second part of the teacher standards, isn't it?
It is part B of the teacher standards. If everyone conducted themselves along those lines and principles, then there wouldn't be half the cases that there are in tribunals. So I think a lot of this is architecture that we're describing: the policies, the staff code of conduct, the teacher standards. obviously behaviour policies for pupils, and there are often policies that about parents and how they can conduct themselves, being allowed onto school premises, etc. But ultimately, you're right, Andrew. It's you can put those policies to one side if everyone buys into the school ethos and
it's
culture.
so different. Yeah.
Yes, you can reflect it in a few paper documents and store them online and show people like we're showing them now. Yeah, they're there. You can have them if you want them. But some of the most positive organisations I've ever worked for, you don't even know where the HR hub is because you've never needed it. You know, there are a few. There are a few. Perhaps not in schools.
Well, it's to use a really good old-fashioned phrase, and I'm so sorry, but I am old, I suppose. Is you just want to create a culture where it's cool to be keen, even for the grown-ups as well. Yeah. It's cool to be keen.
Yeah.
Yeah. And in some places it just isn't, and you just need to try and address that, don't we? But
and we've put in the document that we'll send people all the documents. So we've got the staff code of conduct, we've got the staff appraisal objectives, where you may want to put 1 or 2 staff conduct behavioural matters in. And we've also put something in there about the management standards setting letters, which is a tool talking about cultural assets that a lot of head teachers don't know about. And it's where you want to do something more than having a word in someone's ear about their conduct.
Sure.
But it hasn't yet escalated to where you would want to invoke a formal procedure. And this is a management standard setting letter. Some of the viewers may be familiar with them, others won't. I think they're one of the most underused and most effective tools that we have, or that school leaders have at their disposal. And we've got a, thank you, Andrew. We've got, hopefully people can see that, a little piece on what they are, often referred to as the tactical approach. So this is a letter that you would give to an employee who had conducted themselves, and this is the letter that Sam should have had.
It is, isn't it?
In the case study. This is precisely where this went wrong.
It is.
She should have had a standard setting letter, which reminded her about the values of the organisation and the cultural ethos, and you can then use that as a precursor to either improvement in that person's behaviour and a cessation of the sort of type of behaviour we saw in the case study, or it's a nice escalation into the disciplinary procedure if you need one, rather than what the school did, which was go very bluntly into a suspension and disciplinary proceeding for Sam. If we remember half an hour or so ago back into the case study.
Brilliant.
And these are examples of where someone was asking for examples earlier on. You know, there's a lot of examples here of areas of where conduct can lead to a breach of trust and confidence. You know, posting a video to the whole staff WhatsApp group of wearing a dressing gown, watching children's TV with your son, stating working from home. That's precisely the sort of thing that can lead to a breakdown of trust and confidence.
Absolutely.
Because you can't trust that person to work effectively outside of the school structure. Lots in there. So, you know, this is the sort of area where you can nip this behaviour in the bud, prevent the tribunal that you would have got in Sam and Andy's case. The letter's held on file, it's taken off. This isn't declared as disciplinary action. This falls short of disciplinary action, but it is formal action. It's more than a word in your shell like, and it's less than invoking a formal procedure. And I think if every school used this type of model, sadly, they do have to use it occasionally. Hopefully a word in the shell like would be enough, but if it's not, you can escalate it to this before jumping rather clumsily in, as the school did, to their disciplinary procedure.
Absolutely.
So there's a whole framework, and hopefully there, Andrew, where people can I think if they engage with those stakeholder groups to review their statements of intent on their websites for them to be true and authentic, and they back that up with a few practical policies, all of which have been written for them. And if they wanted to join Pathway, they can just download them. I think beyond that, you then very much rely on the goodwill of people to conduct themselves in a way that you would expect a professional to conduct themselves. Sadly, some don't, and they have to be dealt with.
Nothing better actually for maintaining goodwill, and I know this is such a crushingly obvious thing to say, but maybe it's worth reminding ourselves, is to remember to say thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. Say thank you.
Yeah. It's
quite right.
And I've just sort of I've ended this piece, and people will see this. I'm not, you'll know because we've worked for long enough, Andrew. I'm not a big one for quotations.
For quotes, no, you're not actually.
But actually, the education sector, but the education sector does rather stand out as being one that sort of lays itself open to. And there was one that I found because I was looking,
it's a lovely one.
And I spent, and this whole webinar has been about staff behaviour, conduct, how schools can respond, what schools should really be doing to enable people to conduct themselves professionally without even knowing it. And this quote is from Mahatma Gandhi, and it's really short and very memorable. Behaviour is the mirror in which we can display our image. And I just think it's a very clever, we break down those words, it's sort of the image, people will watch you, they'll listen to you, they'll start to develop a narrative about you as a school leader, and their future behaviour will be based on that narrative.
Yes, it will.
If they see you in a foul temper, Andrew, which I'm sure you rarely are, but if they see you in a horrible temper, their behaviour will be to avoid you.
Absolutely.
Their behaviour will be equally confrontational.
We lose credibility, I think.
If they see you as someone who's welcoming and will give your time, they will welcome you, they will approach you, they will come and talk to you authentically.
Take advantage.
And then take advantage of your goodwill.
Somewhere in between, I think.
But I think this whole area of people developing narratives of other people, and we do, don't we? It's human nature.
Of course we do.
We see someone behave in one way and we automatically judge them. It's human nature.
We do.
And then we base our future behavior towards that person based on that judgment. And therefore, good, positive, energies behavior then just effectively are very infectious. And bad behavior leads to avoidance or equally bad behavior, and it's as simple as that.
Absolutely. Brilliant.
All of this is in the document, folks, so
it's a brilliant document.
Any notes, don't worry, it's all in there, and it will be emailed to you. Thank you, Bobby. Shortly after the event, she can type fast and I can talk rather.
Fantastic. Well, it's always brilliant to see you, and we're going to do this again in the second half of this term, 13th of July. Really looking forward to that. Advice for the current times with Guy again, and there'll be another. I mean, they're really comprehensive, these sessions. There's so much detail in what there's been 50 minutes. Amazing. So we really appreciate it. And if anybody wants to find out more about Discovery Education Pathway, then of course you can click on the URL discoveryeducation.co.uk/pathway, which I know my colleague Bobby will have always put in the chat for us. So helpful. Thank you so much, Bobby, for all your support on these things. We really appreciate, Guy and I really appreciate all your help, don't we, Bobby? We really do. Talk about goodwill. She has it in spades. So thank you for that. So I'm saying thank you. There it is. Thank you. Brilliant. Great to see you again, Guy, as always.
Yeah.
And
thanks, everybody.
Really can't wait to do this again. Righto. Take care, everybody. Have a good evening.
Cheers. Bye for now.